All right, hey everyone. It's Sunday night. It's my birthday, and so for some reason I decided to open up some data instead of opening up some presents for my birthday. I didn't plan on doing a data update, but what I saw in the data I thought was not reported, and so I want to tell you about it so that you at least know about it. The main thing about this is that the university data, I'm going to follow up on what I did, and I'm following literally 20 different universities to see what's going on with them. And from my judgment of what's going on with the data, the kids are all right. The universities are doing okay, if anything, a little better than I thought that they would be. I don't see this being reported, and so this is the dog that didn't bark. You might have noticed that you don't see a lot of stories about the outbreak at school X or the fact that school Y has to put classes on hold. So these are the stories that didn't run, or the Sherlock Holmes example of the dog that didn't bark tells you what's going on. What's going on in this case is we do see a rise in COVID cases after universities open. About 2 weeks later, the cases peak. But then, in all the cases that I'm looking at, except for possibly 2, they drop. And so I want to say this is true about every university I looked at to some degree. They're dropping in there are some that are going up slower. There are just 2 that are in that category. 18 that are dropping, or at the very least staying flat. And this is true for wastewater analysis as well as for COVID testing. It does not appear to be a function of testing or of any policy, specific policy that I can follow, that the good schools are running and the bad schools are not. Instead, it's just a general conscientiousness among the policies that we've set up and the students that have come to class. They've turned out to be handling this, again, better than I might have predicted at the beginning. So I'm going to look at a score of universities, and the general trend that's true for at least 18 of the 20 is that in the short term, cases rise. In the medium term, cases drop for the schools for which we are at the medium term. Now, of course, in the long term, who knows what's going on? But it's important to say this is what we've got, and this is very consistent across the country for the past month. And so I want to show you the data. The 2 schools I'm talking about that have rising cases right now are Appalachian State University and UT Chattanooga. Now, there's some issues with the consistency of the data reporting between these and other schools, and none of it's exponential growth. It's just going up by some definition of up. 18 schools have dropping or flat cases, and there's only 2 of those schools I have any question about the data that I have listed here. I'm going to go through those school by school in the second video, but because I know that interest in a specific school is because of a specific reason, I'm going to leave it as a general trend right now. That's what prompted this is one of the things I've been noticing. Of course, you know I've been following King County, Snohomish County, Seattle area cases. And so you have the blue King County, the orange Snohomish County. We have it relative to the state-mandated moderate risk threshold that we have right here. Now, they were going down, and in the past couple days, really, they've gone up again. What's going on? Well, one thing that's going on is that UW classes started a week ago, and then the cases started to go up. The students converged on campus. We know that there are at least 100 cases on UW Frat Row. Technically off campus, right? But definitely students, population, are majority there. So that's where a lot of these spikes in cases are coming from. And so that worried me when I first saw it. And I wanted to look around at all the other places that opened before us to see if I can find some kind of pattern for what I think will happen. What I think will happen, now it's been a week, the cases might stay up for another week or maybe even 2. But then I predict they will drop because that's the pattern that I've seen nationwide. And if anything, in Seattle, we've been more exposed to this virus by this point because we were one of the first ones to be exposed to it. So I'm fairly confident that I want to predict, sitting here right now looking at this data that's gone up, that this data will go down again soon. The other factor, by the way, is that we're getting cold weather now. How much is that affecting this? And I have to say, I don't know. All I can do is I can compare it to the other schools, and at least as far as the school calendar goes, the pattern, if we follow that same pattern, I'll be very happy. By the way, this is the low risk threshold for Snohomish. We were converging on it before, now we've bumped up from it. I'm hoping we'll be able to bump back down towards it again. So the one thing that you should notice, that was cases. Hospitalizations are reported, and I've been collecting the hospitalizations as reported per day. Now there's some weirdness in this data. You'll notice that there are even some days that are negative. But this is following the same trend as before, and you can see there's not a big bump in hospitalizations. There's like some stochastic like days, bad days and good days. But overall, we're talking about King County usually has fewer than 10 people going in for COVID a day out of 2.2 million people. You have proportionately less numbers for that for the Snohomish, which is 1/3 the size of King. Oh, and by the way, this is the zero line, so you can see that even the glitches in the data, bumping up and down with being reported, we're on the scale of the glitches in the data when we talk about this, because we have some days that they say, oh, I take it back. You know, we had 4 hospitalizations that were reported that weren't actually supposed to be reported or were double counted. Who knows? These are the charts that you can get on the King County COVID dashboard, and you can see that the cases have gone up, but also they've ticked down recently. This is something that looks pretty good to me. I've been watching these day in and day out, and they've been consistently going up, so the fact that it's ticking down is what I'm hoping will be a positive sign. Test positivity, we were actually below the state mandated threshold, but then we've gone up above it. Again, I'm hoping this will start to go down soon. And again, hospitalized cases, deaths, are not going up in anything like the same way. Now, these are lagging indicators, but notice that they are decoupled more and more from cases as we go along and we get better therapies and better detection. And all I want to do is I want to show you these data from the website and say, here they are. There's not a spike in hospitalizations or deaths yet. If anything, hospitalizations are going down, even though they're stubbornly, sort of plateaued. Now, across the nation, you can look at those numbers at covidtracking.com, and there's been a increase in cases. You see, if you look at the orange line, there's a bit of an increase. And I'm showing you all the data here because I want to put this in perspective. After the rise in cases in early September, we've had, actually that was mid-September, sort of literally mid-September, we've had the cases dropping for the past week. And that's fairly consistent. And I want you to see that on the scale of this graph, that's about a consistent change on the scale of the graph, bumping up and down. It looks like there's been a third little bump in cases. And maybe it is connected to the colleges opening. If so, then it's definitely a bump that the system has absorbed. The other thing, and this actually worries me more than the cases bump, the current hospitalizations stopped going down and they started going up again. But notice that they're going up at a much slower rate than they were before. There's a couple of places like Wisconsin where you have hospitalizations, you have some outbreaks going on. So I'm hoping that this will turn around soon. This is not going up at the same rate of anything else. So it looks like I wouldn't predict that we're going to go up to 60,000 current hospitalizations again. It just doesn't look like the same graph. Not now. The only thing that could change this again, who knows what the weather's going to do. Deaths are on the way down, and of course they lag a little. I wouldn't be surprised if they bumped up a little in a week or two. But I expect the bump to be of the magnitude of the hospitalizations bump. So, of course, my local thing is my university. We have a COVID dashboard, and we have less than 1,000 students on campus right now. So this is a smaller student population, but they are on campus. Household transmission is how COVID likes to transfer. We're very safe in our classes and face-to-face meetings, but in the dorms is where it's going to spread. But we also have policies that account for that. So 3 weeks on campus. Week 1 we had 1 case, and I said it might go up. Week 2 we had 2 cases, and then I was sort of holding my breath to see what would happen in week 3. So far in week 3 we have had 1 case, and now that week 3 is over, I can confidently say, well, it went down. But that's, small sample size, small university, but it's not going up exponentially. It appears that most of our protocols are working for now. And some of those students who went into isolation at a couple weeks ago, I predict that they will be coming out of isolation soon. So we will definitely have capacity, it looks like, to handle what's going on with the COVID. So far, so good. And my biggest example is I wanted to compare to another university, a university that started earlier in a similarly sized metropolitan area. And so I looked at Bethel University, which is in St. Paul, and they're about twice the size of SPU, and they had more cases than SPU. You can see that they don't actually go all the way back to school because they've been on campus since September 1st. And they did have a cumulative number of about 20 to 25 positive tests. By the way, this appears to include off-campus, which is not included in the SPU numbers. So the direct comparison might be a little bit difficult to do, but what I can see in these data is after they got through 18 days from the beginning of their semester, they have not had a positive test since. We are now 21 days at SPU since the start of our quarter, and I'm hoping we can follow Bethel's path. It seems entirely possible because they're doing it. Lots of things that are different, but a lot of things are the same. And so, what I can do is I can look at individual things and I can pull them up. And I was really hoping that someone would actually do this systematically for all the schools in the nation. I just found this preprint today. And so this preprint appears to do it well. So I'm taking it at face value. It hasn't been peer reviewed yet. But I think that this is right because it goes along with what I saw and said based on what I saw 2 weeks ago in a smaller sample size. The thing that's getting in the headlines from this is that there are more than 3,000 additional cases of COVID-19 that are associated specifically with colleges reopening. And so that number gets reported. But I just showed you how many new cases there were per day. It was probably too small for you to read, so I'll tell you, we're getting 45,000 new cases a day. So what this is saying is that less than 10% of our new cases can be attributed to the university's opening. The other thing I noticed about this is they did a good comparison. They compared 2 weeks before the colleges opened to 2 weeks after the colleges opened. And they looked at the county level data too to see if this was spreading to the county. And what they saw is they saw this right here. The purple and blue lines are the open colleges of the different types. And you can see that the purple and blue lines are up after the days relative to opening 0 in the middle of the graph. But the other thing I want you to notice, there's large uncertainties to all this data. But doesn't it look like it peaks, accounting for the uncertainties, doesn't it look like it peaks around 10 days, which is about 1 to 2 weeks after opening, which is my conclusion that I came to 2 weeks ago. So they only looked for 2 weeks after colleges start. And their data seems to show that it's going down. That looks significant to me. Of course, because they're only doing it for 14 days, you can't really say that there's 3 days that are significant. But my previous analysis goes along with that. This seems to support my previous analysis, and so therefore I want to go and do my previous analysis again. Based on the data that I presented, I asked my students to help out. One student, Victor Hansen, made this chart for 7 universities. He noticed they went up and then they went down. He measured where the peak was. The peak was actually about 7 days. In some cases, it was as much as 15 days. But like we said, the cases peaked 1 to 2 weeks after classes started. In all of these cases, we saw a decrease after the fact. So I wanted to look and see, is this still holding up? Were we lucky or unlucky in the 7 that we looked at? So I followed up. I had 20 schools from the September 22 update that I could follow up on. 18 of those dropped, and 2 of those had weird, what looks like mild increases. Only 1 would I put in the quality of, I'm worried about it. So I checked on these same schools. I have all of that in part 2. But I want to show you one school because it's my favorite school. It shows it's the school that didn't go on a pause, didn't toggle off. They do have policies, and they are wearing masks and distancing. So don't move them all the way to the extreme in your mind. They are not at the extreme. They're doing what we've pretty much agreed everyone should do. But they aren't calling classes off. Again, if I'm wrong about this, someone please tell me. It's sometimes hard to find out. But I don't believe that they would, because after the first day, you did have cases go up. And it was worrisome for about a week, and then they started to go down. But people were worried. Is it because students weren't getting tested, that they all didn't want to, they thought they'd be well, and so it was still spreading cryptically? And the wastewater actually supports a little bit of this hypothesis because they tested the wastewater, and for 3 weeks after the schools started to meet, the wastewater results were up. They weren't mostly in the red range of being up, that's above 10 million on this graph, but they were in the yellow range. And they didn't go down when the cases went down, except for the last 2 weeks. When I made my last presentation, they were still up. The last 2 weeks they've gone down. You see that they're actually as low as ever. Some points are now 0 within the limit of detection. That is definite progress. This is not to say that this is going to be like this forever, but the cases correlate with the wastewater analysis. This is not just a case of students avoiding testing. This is genuinely not in the system as much as it was anymore. And so I want to return to this headline. I think this is still a good headline. Upheaval, pandemic weirdness, and a fragile stability. The schools are still stable. And I want to say that the headline for the video below it is not proving out. It's a ticking time bomb. Well, it's still ticking for 6 to 4 weeks, in some cases 2 months. I'm confident right now that I've gotten the very basic experience that my students need in my quarter. So I'm just happy that SPU's made it 3 weeks. I hope we can make it another 3 weeks, and then another 3 weeks after that. And then we're going to take time off for Thanksgiving. We'll have to see where we are when the Thanksgiving sets in. But I also want to remember that the winter peak for coronaviruses that we can compare to did only happen in November and December. So if it's correlating to that, which I don't know if it is, October, it shouldn't be going up from weather yet. We'll have to see. But so far so good is my message I want to say here. And because you are not seeing ticking time bomb or time bomb exploded on campus measures like this, you're not seeing those stories. And I want to point out that that is a good thing. So that's what I want to do for my birthday. I want to give you the present of data. And I will now go through and I'm going to show you all of those data, but because I know that people aren't really into that, I'll let those of you who are not the data nerds go for now. And those of you who just trust me, thank you for trusting me. Those of you who don't trust me, I've got data for you next.